What's going on, guys, and welcome to the New Bark News Podcast for March 10th, 2019.
Mario Day.
Yeah, apparently. Right here with Logan, we're going to be starting off today's podcast talking about some games that came out this past week and apologizing for a lack of blast processing causing us to lose last week's podcast. That's
Sega doesn't make hardware anymore. It's very hard for us to source that stuff.
Yeah, so the closest thing we can do is plug everything into a Sega power strip. Anyway, so this past week we had the game Beat Cop come out for the Switch, the Xbone, and the PS4. Eternity, The Last Warrior for PC and PS4. Then we had something else.
Left Alive.
Yeah, Left Alive for those same game systems. TikTok, A Tale for Two for PC. DMCV, which sounds like a car dealership, for PS4, Xbone, and PC. And then Kirby's Epic Yarn to 3DS.
Dumb.
Yeah, because it's a Wii game going to 3DS.
Dumb.
Not really sure what the idea was there, but okay. We had a lot of ports here recently. What can I say? None of these games I actually picked up, and none of these games I'm actually sure I really even want to pick up.
Devil May Cry 5 is supposed to be really good.
Yeah, I guess my thing is that's really expensive. So if I want to try a Devil May Cry thing, I'd rather get one of the older games that's relatively cheap right now.
See, the thing is...
Price. Price is the golden point here. And I'd rather, I don't know how I feel about car dealership video games.
Yeah, I'm just not one for that style of gameplay.
Yeah, and I already own Bayonetta, and I got to play Bayonetta first. And
of course.
Supposedly they're basically the same style. But yeah, Devil May Cry was probably the biggest of these releases. I feel like Kirby's Epic Yarn as a port would theoretically should have been the next biggest thing, but there hasn't been a whole lot of major advertising for that. Once more, the 3DS is kind of dying slowly, even if it's like choking and taking years to choke out still.
Yeah, you're just pushing the pillow onto its face.
Yeah, and it's just taking a really, really long time. It's fighting. It's fighting. Respect, I like the console, but, you know.
It is the perfect entry to Nintendo.
All right. So let's go on to what's coming out this week. We got Tom Clancy's The Division 2. This is probably the biggest release coming out this week. A lot of hype being generated around this game. I have not played The Division. I did play Rainbow Six Vegas back on 360 for a bit. Combat system's really nice. It integrates cover usage and being able to lob things over cover and everything in a really fun kind of way.
I tried a Tom Clancy game on the original Xbox once. I couldn't climb a ladder.
Yeah,
and that's all I remember from it.
The mechanics from what I remember in terms of Rainbow Six, which obviously is a later game in the series, they take some getting used to because they're not exactly what you expect. But once you're used to them, it allows you to do some neat environmental interactions that a lot of first-person shooters don't necessarily allow for. So
bursting through walls.
Yeah, it's probably cool. Haven't played it. Not going to pick it up because of money, but it's probably cool. I guess my other thing about it is it's one of those games that is heavily based around the online multiplayer. I mean, it has single-player features, but that's one of the big draws. And I try to lean away from those types of games because I feel like they have an expiration date put on them.
They also charge for online, and I'm not about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yet we both will probably fork over our money for Switch Online.
Nope. Well, okay, maybe.
But, or find a workaround, you know.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So then we got a One Piece World Seeker. One Piece is that anime that's over 1,000 episodes. It's way too intimidating to get into. I mean, seriously,
I'm in the same boat.
I've watched 4 whole Yu-Gi-Oh series, and One Piece is over double the amount of episodes in those, which is just mind-blowing to me. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not a short anime. There are over 100 episodes per series. It's crazy. Then we have Lego Marvel The Collection. This is kind of cool because it's a compilation of Lego Marvel Superheroes 1 and 2, as well as Lego Marvel's The Avengers. So if you're into those types of games, this is probably one of the best budget options for you. A quick note on this is it's only coming to the PS4 and the Xbone, not Switch, which kind of sucks. Because I feel like this being more of a family-friendly type of game series would make a lot of sense to be on Switch, but you take what you can get, right? Then we got the Caligula Effect Overdose. From the brief looking both of us did into this, it looks a lot like Persona. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because I think we both voiced how much we enjoy that series.
Hell yeah.
Probably not going to pick it up, though, because I've got so many bloody Persona games to play through already, which is more of a tried and true series for it. In terms of other things, does that say Rico? We jotted everything down. Yeah, we got Rico, PS4, and Switch, some indie game, I'm sure. Then we have MX versus ATV, All Out Anniversary Edition for PS4, Xbone, and Switch. Then we have Blood Waves coming to Xbone and Switch. Now, the interesting thing that kind of stands out to me there is we have something that's not getting a PlayStation 4 port that isn't a first-party or Nintendo or Microsoft title.
That stuck out to me, too.
because I guess it's a sign that like Xbone and Switch are being kind of thrown together for certain things. It's like an odd combination.
That's true. We have talked about this before.
Yeah, I mean, like, once more, a lot of times you'll see something that doesn't come out to Switch just because it isn't quite as powerful or whatever, or you'll see something that comes out to just Xbox or just PlayStation, or sometimes you even see things that come to PlayStation and Nintendo for all reasons, but this is kind of a new pairing. Sort of odd. I guess it shows the way the market is beginning to develop here. For better or worse, of course. Yeah, interesting times for sure. So let's go and move on to some more in-depth news articles for the week. The first one is going to be, it's Mario Day, if you spell out March 10th.
Write down the date and look at it, and there you go. It says Mario.
Basically, yep. So we have a game sales for digital copies of certain Mario games for the Nintendo Switch right now, including Mario Party, Mario Kart, Mario Odyssey, and New Super Mario
Tennis
Bros.
Ages.
Ah, yes, that one as well. Yeah, Mario Tennis Ages. We're playing 1800s Mario Tennis here, guys.
Good.
But yeah, it can save you like $20 on these games, 20 to $30. So not too bad if you're into digital things. We both heavily prefer physical releases, and this unfortunately does not apply. There's also a Switch bundle going on right now. If you buy the Nintendo Switch with one of these games bundled in, you can pay $330, which would be opposed to $300 for the Switch, and then $60 for one of these games.
And you get pins.
Pins are always a good perk. Always a good perk.
The only reason I'm pre-ordering Persona Q2. I want those pins.
You gotta have the pins, man. Are those buttons or pins? That's like the genuine question. What's the difference?
I believe they are buttons. They're more like buttons. So, I just use pins as like an overarching thing.
Right. So is it sort of like the not every square is a rectangle thing? Not all buttons are or not all pins are buttons, but all buttons are pins.
Someone's going to contradict us, but probably that's like the way I see it. Is that buttons? Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta love your language terminology. Next one's going to be the fact that Microsoft has announced they're releasing an Xbox One discless edition, which is apparently going to be a download only Xbox. Kind of sad. This was what the Xbone was originally announced to be.
I believe this particular edition will be called Xbox One S All Digital Edition. They're promoting it as like a special sort of thing you can get, but of course that's not at all what this is.
My thing is, this is one of those console remakes where you literally remove a feature.
But then again, it is supposed to bring down price.
Right. So if it's significantly less expensive, like let's face it, if you're keeping your eyes out, you can pretty regularly find an Xbone S for like $200. So unless they're offering this thing for like $150 or less, I see no purpose in getting it because you can't do the fake backwards compatibility that they offer for Xbox 360. Calling it fake backwards compatibility because you download a file rather than reading the actual disc, but still a really awesome feature to have on there, and especially when it's the only console of this generation that features it. You can't do that. And then it basically means you can't own physical copies of your games. And I'm sorry, but I don't like renting games from a store. And I know some people are going to fight in the comments section if you see that. But like the fact of the matter is you only have a digital game as long as that store is operational and you have the hard drive with it on it that works. And it's just,
and then again, you can't really trade digital copies. Now, I do want to point out that from a business perspective, for Microsoft, this actually makes a lot of sense. They've been wanting for a very long time now to move more towards a service rather than a full-fledged developer. We've seen this with their propagation of the Game Pass and other things like that. So for someone who wants a lot of games and they want them like, now, if they're like basically a game glutton, this would make a lot of sense for that person because they could get their Game Pass, they can get their Xbox for very cheap. Essentially, you're just paying for the hardware to run the games, and you could just go out on whatever games they're offering there. But again, this is more of a short-term thing. In the long term, that's probably not going to work out so well for that person because they're going to lose access to those games, and if you don't have access to the games, you basically can't use the console for a whole lot.
Yeah, it's really odd to me. And then a lot of people are speculating this is going to be major competition for the PlayStation. And I guess my counter to that is why would this suddenly change the console distribution? Because you have the same games available for this unless it's a significant financial savings option. Because right now, like PlayStation 4, I was about to say PlayStation 2, a PlayStation 4 Slim, you can a lot of times find for like $260, something around there. So yeah, it's a little more than the Xbox, but when you're footing out that kind of money, I feel like that amount of price difference usually isn't that huge of a deal. It's not like back in the 360 days when it was like 300 for a new 360 versus 600 for a freaking PlayStation 4 or 3 at launch. I am messing up PlayStation numbers awfully today. But so unless they're offering this for like 150 or less, I don't see it making a huge splash unless this is like just a test run for them to see how the market reacts because they are developing the Xbox Scarlet or whatever right now. Maybe they're seeing how people handle it.
That is possible.
I mean, I know going into this generation, they had wanted to make the Xbox One digital only, but there was a ton of fan backlash, and that's what eventually led to it kind of leading backwards. So they may just be sort of being like, all right, let's see how this performs. We'll use that as our marker for whether we're going to make the Xbox Scarlet have a disk drive or not. And that would make a lot of sense, but in terms of being a legitimate generational competitor, especially this late for the console generation, it just strikes me as odd.
It definitely seems, though, that consumers have become more accepting of digital only, though.
Yeah, as much as I want to fight it with every tooth and nail of my body, you're absolutely right. So moving right along here, the Dark Souls games creator would, quote unquote, like to make a battle royale game.
He said love. He would love to make a battle royale game.
Please no, just no. Why? Why? Dark Souls is one of those games that's like a single player and co-op experience, not this battle royale stuff. Like, I get it, battle royales are fun for some people, but I don't want this to be the next thing that everybody's trying their hand at because it's just, I don't want it to consume the market. Looking back at the 360 and PlayStation 3 generation, a lot of the most notable titles are all first-person shooters because that was the thing that consumed the market at that time. And looking back at that generation compared to like the PlayStation 2 era, I feel like it's a lot harder to find this broad-spanning catalog of games. I don't want this to turn, like the tail end of this generation, to turn into that again.
I just don't like paying for online.
Yeah, that's another really valid point. I'm kind of right there with you. It's like, why am I paying for something when I already pay for my internet and I already pay for the console?
Exactly.
What is this? Like, and battle royale games are all said and fun. I'm making a bigger deal out of this. And if the creator wants to make it, go for it. If it's a good game, awesome. But I just don't want to see another trend that consumes the entire market is more so my point. And it's nothing specific against battle royale games.
And I do definitely believe that this particular developer would really want to emphasize their own personal twist on this, not necessarily make another battle royale game.
Right, and the Dark Souls creators kind of are known for putting some innovation into things. So I bet they would make something kind of interesting with it. So by all means, if you want to do this, do it. Just please don't let it consume the entire market to be like, oh, this is the Pokemon company. We're coming out with a battle royale game. This is the freaking Konami. We're making a battle royale game. And it's just, please don't make everybody do it.
Would you argue that Tetris 99 is the battle royale Tetris?
It is. It absolutely is. And it's beautiful, which is why my entire thoughts on this article are constantly contradicting myself. So moving right along here, our last little news blip we've got is Pokemon files for a trademark on Armored Mewtwo. Now, there have been a lot of rumors flying around about the fact that Pokemon Sword and Shield is going to sport some sort of armored versions of the Pokemon that we already have, to go in tandem with the fact that it kind of goes with the English knight sort of theming that they're going for with Sword and Shield. I think that could be pretty cool. The question becomes, is the trademark for that? Could it be something to do with the fact that they're trying to do a CG remake of the original Pokemon movie where Armored Mewtwo originally appeared? Could it be something to deal with like a Pokemon Go event? All in, we don't know. I mean, those all have varying probabilities. I have a feeling it probably just has to do with the movie, personally, because the Armored Mewtwo that they're talking about is probably the one from the original movie, which that armor doesn't look anything like medieval armor, which kind of goes away from the whole medieval theming going for Sword and Shield. But, I mean, of course, we could always be proven wrong there.
Yeah, and either way, this is beneficial to Nintendo. Because more patents means more merchandise can be sold, and et cetera, et cetera.
Right, and Pokemon's one of their biggest properties, and seeing some, as a big fan of Pokemon, seeing some new ideas come into play there is never something I'm necessarily against. I mean, even Sun and Moon, I wasn't huge on the island trial mechanic as opposed to gyms, but it was cool to have a fresh take on things. It makes that Pokemon experience feel unique. Whether you are for it or against it, it's kind of a different story, but it at least gives that entry into the series more of its own identity. So this is going to sort of, kind of, not so well, flow into our main topic for the day, which is going to be games being ported. This has been something that in the past 10 years has dominated the gaming market. whether it be remastering old games, and we'll kind of debate whether a lot of those remasters are really remasters or not in a few minutes here, or just taking games that were initially exclusive to one console and then moving them to another console, etc., etc. So I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this, Logan. Go ahead and shoot ahead.
Well, the thing that sort of started this as being our main topic was seeing Kirby Epic Yarn being ported from Wii to the 3DS.
Right.
And I'm sure you've heard me shout dumb multiple times. Just reason being is that game is so old now. I mean, are we really going to try and re-buy it on a dying platform?
I guess the main idea is portability, but I feel like if you were going to do that, especially as generally small in terms of scale that a lot of the Kirby games are, why wouldn't you just release this as part of a Kirby compilation for the Switch?
Exactly.
Like, because that's not a dying platform. That's something Nintendo's going all in on. This one just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, a lot of the other ports we've seen in the past 10 years, at least on some level, make sense. Because it's like, okay, we're going to take this game that came out towards the tail end of the 360 and PS3 lifespan. We're going to also put it out for PS4 and Xbone to help kind of push those consoles, make their library wider, more accessible to people, for people who may have skipped on the PS3 or Xbox One, or maybe they just had a Wii that generation or whatever. Versus this, it's like, Epic Yarn came out in like 2008.
Yeah, when I was looking at this, I was like, "Are you sure you don't mean like a sequel or something?"
Yeah. But it's an outright port. It's odd. It's odd. So let's discuss generally ports as a whole. I think
Exactly.
a good place to start with that, because we are talking about this console generation, is in terms of a lot of this generation's most notable library, a lot of those games are just HD remasters of what we had before. And that kind of brings up the topic of, are they really remasters? Because most of the time, at least in my experience, graphically those games don't look that much better. And a lot of times I feel like they're just taking the original models from the game and sort of just upping the scale.
I certainly like it from a bargain standpoint, especially because me and Andrew are like at least 10 years behind on anything new that's released. So when there's an HD bundle that bundles, multiple games from a certain series that came out at around that time, I mean, it's perfect. It's a win-win. I can play it in higher resolution most of the time and on essentially the most optimized software. There's really no compromise.
Right, and a lot of that part of it is nice because, I mean, a lot of these compilations, they'll be released at kind of a bargain price, like you said. For example, the BioShock collection. If you were to buy each of those games new and not rob GameStop the way we did here recently, or not literally rob them, but just get stupidly good prices, they would cost you around $40 to $60 each. They were released as the BioShock collection on PlayStation 4. And it's like, this is awesome. I can play all of the BioShock collections on one console with just a couple of discs. Really, really good. And it's also on the newer consoles, and there is that upscaling. A lot of times there can be a frame rate and performance boost, which is nice there. But the other question becomes, to some extent, couldn't you make a case for these types of things just being cash grabs? After all, it's literally the same game. Like, that's the debate I'm always going through in my head is,
It's true.
Is this a service to the fans, or is this the company just trying to be like, this is the HD remaster, please pay for it again?
Yeah, I think a lot of it does come from the fact, though, that backwards compatibility as a whole, I know I go about tangents on this all the time, but it's true, backwards compatibility as a whole has been neglected by the gaming community. So I believe that a lot of developers see an opportunity in that. Like Andrew said, they stand to make money with these HD remasters, and they don't have to do a ton of work a lot of the time. Sometimes we see HD remasters that are little more than just capitalizing on the fact that this particular platform has HDMI support. So,
yeah, it's absolutely correct. I mean, there are times where this is done to a crazy scale. Like Resident Evil 2, they remade that entire game from the ground up.
Exactly.
Which is insane. I think that's the perfect way to do a remaster. And it's actually kind of an interesting way to do it as well, because then it's worthwhile to experience both the original version of the game and the newer game. But something like, for example, the Kingdom Hearts The Story So Far collection. I'm playing through Kingdom Hearts, the original. I played some of it back on the PS2 back in the day. The graphics look a little bit nicer, they look a little bit sharper, but there's still a lot of polygoning going on. Like, you can tell this was originally a PS2 game, not a PS3 game, not a PS4 game, a PS2 game. It still plays like it too. And it's like playing through it on the PlayStation 4, I have no desire to go back and play through it on the PS2 because I don't feel like I'm missing anything. If I were to play Resident Evil 2, the remake, I might still feel the need to go back and play the original version on the PlayStation 1. Which is kind of really cool. It gives you like a new spin on an old formula.
What you're saying about Kingdom Hearts basically resonates a lot to what I'm feeling about the Zelda Twilight Princess that I'm playing through now. There are a lot of times when I'm walking through like a forest or something, and I'm just like, this was a GameCube game. There's no doubt about it.
Right, and that's where the question really comes into play of, do these HD remasters really just count as simple ports? And part of me genuinely says yes, because once more, it's running, a lot of times it's taken similar models or slightly upgraded versions of them and running them through an upscaler, which makes some of a difference, but it's not huge. Going back to your point about the whole backwards compatibility is, look, I buy these HD remasters as much as anybody else because of the affordability and everything else of them. And sometimes if I don't buy the original game and the HD remaster is only a little more, I'm like, sure, why not? At the very least, it'll run better. The textures will look a little bit crisper.
Exactly.
Even if there is still some polygoning or whatever left over from the original. But is that encouraging these companies to not do backwards compatibility and just continue to put out these remasters of the major games? That way people have to buy the game again if they want to play it on the newest platforms.
I definitely think the answer to that question is yes.
And I think it's kind of sad because as gamers, we kind of find ourselves stuck. Genuinely, I don't want to support that type of mentality. I mean, just like we were talking about with the Xbox, one of the coolest features of the Xbox One and the Xbox One S and the Xbox One X, they're the only console of this generation sports some form of backwards compatibility. And those games, while it doesn't like inherently completely upscale them in the best of ways, it at least attempts to put them out in 4K if your TV's doing it, and does make somewhat of a difference. I'd say it makes almost as much of a difference as these HD remasters do in a lot of cases, at least from what I've seen so far of it. And with that being the case, like, buying these HD remasters, these digital-only consoles, sort of discourages that type of backwards compatibility, when in some ways I would say if the Xbox One would have just made it so all games were backwards compatible, they would have done it arguably the best of any backwards compatible system so far.
That's true, and they would have been the only one in this generation to do something as drastic as that.
Right, and what's crazy about it is it goes back to the original Xbox too, which is it's 3 generations. That gives you a massive library. I mean, they have backwards compatibility to all of the games, but they've done most of the major ones, which is really awesome. And they're adding to that list still pretty regularly.
That's one of the reasons I'm very stubborn in keeping my fat PS3 alive.
Yeah, I know, right?
Because I get like the entire PlayStation library up to the third PlayStation just in one console, and it all gets outputted in HDMI with wireless controllers, and compared to the memory cards, virtually unlimited memory.
Right, because most of those game save states from the old days, they're like not even a megabyte, which is really, really awesome. So let's talk a little bit about these HD remasters forward a tad here, and that's that some developers I think have been starting to plan for this in a way that I think is a little bit better. For example, with Pokemon Sun and Moon, I don't think we're going to get HD remasters of these games per se. But when they were developing the models for the Pokemon for those games, they made it so that those models could inherently be scaled up or down as need be, to the point where there were 4K versions of the models, which some people have actually gotten to run through Citra emulators on the computer, that look like legitimate 4K, not just this upscaled, still polygonal version of the 3DS model you see on your screen. This looks like a totally HD version of the Pokemon. It looks brilliant, but it's the same code for the same model. When companies plan like that, that's really awesome, because then it makes it so these HD remasters feel a little more legitimate. I feel a little more okay buying that, versus, once more, using Kingdom Hearts as an example, it's still, once more, it just looks like a crisp PS2 game with HDMI supports that digital signal looks overall better on a newer TV.
What you were saying about the Pokemon thing is definitely impressive. How do you think that will, if that will expand to other developers, how do you think that sort of mentality will be implemented?
I think it would be, we'd see a lot of what we currently see, just they'd make it so that those models can actually upscale properly to the modern system to maximize the graphical impact.
So we'll be seeing basically better HD remasters.
Yeah, and at what rate, I still have mixed feelings on it, but I feel a little bit better about it, because it's like, okay, this is legitimately improving my experience dramatically. And once more, there's the whole convenience thing, and yes, it does look crisper, so I can't emphasize that enough, guys. The fact that these HD remasters do make somewhat of a difference is very true. It's just not a huge dramatic difference most of the time. It's not the Resident Evil 2 versus Resident Evil 2, the new one type of a difference. That's the ultimatum. Talking about Kingdom Hearts for a second here, while I do in some ways feel a little bit odd about the HD remastering, because once more, it looks nice, but it's not perfect, that's also the perfect example of a good compilation, though. Because that takes literally 9 games that were across like 5+ different platforms and puts them on a disc for one system. which is beautiful because otherwise you'd have to own a DS, a PS2, a PS3, a PSP, and a PlayStation 4 to play every Kingdom Hearts games. Now it's just PlayStation 4, which is kind of cool. It's really cool when they actually do that with these systems because it makes it available, and that's also a legitimate port being our primary topic.
That is true. Very impressive. I would definitely buy something like that.
Right. Like, think about it as if, I don't know, what's the easiest way to describe this? If we were to take, like, all the Final Fantasy games, and we put, like, 5 of them on one disc, 5 of them on the next disc, and 5 of them on the next disc after that. Obviously, they probably wouldn't fit all in one disc because these are massive games. Mm-hmm. Most of them involve, like, 3 discs as is. But still, that would be a really good way because then you don't need this slew of different systems just to play all of them. That's kind of the perfect, ideal scenario for a game port.
I wouldn't need my fat PS3.
Yeah, and those things are mildly unreliable, to say the least.
Hey.
Yeah.
It works.
But yeah, I mean, overall thoughts on ports, they're a nice idea. They're convenient. But I guess I just am asking a little bit more out of the developers for them.
Well, I think you mean HD remasters rather than ports.
Right. And I mean, speaking of the ports, another nice thing that I think companies have been doing lately is ports, I think, work at their best when you take a game that's initially only playable at home and then port it to a device that can be taken with you. For example, a lot of what we've seen with the Switch. We've seen a ton of games from last generation being moved over to the Switch, so now you can play them with you. I mean, they were awesome playing on the 360 and the PlayStation 3, right? Mm-hmm. But I can't take my 360 or my PlayStation 3 with me easily. I mean, you can get all kinds of screen boxes and everything else that are plug-and-play-ish, but that's going to cost you a significant chunk of dough, doesn't give you the whole new system, and it's still not nearly as portable as the Switch is.
Seeing the Doom reboot still blows my mind.
Yeah, it's
on the Switch.
It's awesome.
Taking that with you, it's incredible.
It's awesome, and that's kind of the ideal port. And to touch back on the HD remasters for the thing, one other thing I think they've been starting to catch on to that's really nice is with a lot of the Final Fantasy games, it is still a lot of that HD upscaling and stuff, and the graphics do look a fair bit nicer, but they also totally remaster the soundtrack a lot of times, which is really good, especially for a game like Final Fantasy, where a lot of the allure of it is the soundtrack, because it's so well written, and a lot of times they're fully orchestrated with the newer games. So updating that, and then what's even better about it is a lot of times they'll give you the option to choose either the original soundtrack or the newer one. So you can kind of experience it both ways.
So since we're talking about ports, if there is a port of a certain game, what are your preferences for which platform you'd be getting it on? Like, say a game came out and it was available on, like, pretty much everything that you can think of.
That kind of goes back to where I talk about the ideal port, and that I think it should usually come out for something portable. So going from, once more, a 360 game to now being available on Switch, I am more than happy to buy it again if it's a game I really enjoyed that I can now take on the go with me.
Gotcha.
So the Switch is kind of my go-to there. What about you?
I'd have to agree at this point. Yeah. Switch port will always reign supreme, especially since, what was it? The online, I guess.
Yeah.
Either way, it is cheaper on the Switch. So if it was a game that was focused like that, that would be the platform I would choose.
Exactly. And once more, the Switch kind of opens up that idea for the ideal port. And the PlayStation Vita was doing that to some extent last generation. That saw a fair number of ports from PlayStation, whether it be PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 2, over to it, which was really cool because it was like, okay, here's this game I can usually just play at home, now wherever. Very accessible, very good. So any other last thoughts on ports here?
Not particularly.
Okay, so yeah, overall...
Switch ports.
Yeah, Switch ports. They're a good thing. Please keep doing them. HD ports. Please make your graphics a little bit better. That way I'm more tempted to buy them. But yeah, sorry if that was one of the shorter topics, guys, but there just wasn't a whole lot tying into this week's news that we felt we could make a whole topic out of that it wasn't something we already touched upon. So let's go and move on to what we've been playing for the week. And now with a recent pickups video that should be going up later this week, we've got a ton of new games in our library, some of which are going to be featured in this What We're Playing segment.
Do you want to start off?
Sure, man. So, Final Fantasy 13. I have been holding off my thoughts to you on this game, specifically for this podcast, because I know, generally speaking, from what I've heard, this is one of the more polarizing Final Fantasy games in the fan base, and I'm beginning to see why. First off, when you're introduced to the game, it's mind-boggling. The fact that this game was made in 2008 or 2009, compared to everything else I'm aware of that came around in that same time frame, graphically, scale-wise, soundtrack-wise, absolutely blows my mind. Like, if you told me this was a game that was made last year for the PlayStation 4, I would probably believe you. That's how good and wonderfully that it runs. And the world building, absolutely incredible. There's just the scale is the big thing I want to get at here. You've got so many things being introduced to you. You feel like you're diving into a complete world. You've got this whole thing with a rebellion going on and a purge going on, and the fact that there's this down below center with people getting infected and all kinds of other things. It's mind-boggling. The character models look great. The voice acting's really well done, even if there's a couple cringy dialogue lines here and there. But that's not necessarily uncommon, especially going from Japanese to English translations. It certainly happens from time to time. The soundtrack sounds like something out of a movie, if not even better. Now, where it gets a little iffy for me is the combat system's very weird. Final Fantasy known for being one of the best JRPGs, right? Whether that be action combat system for like action RPGs like the Tales series or some of the Final Fantasy entries, or more classical turn-based systems like what we see in Persona games and a lot of the other Final Fantasy games, this one falls in a very odd place. It's not like an action RPG, but it's not exactly a turn-based one either. It's sort of this real-time system, which I know they implement a fair bit into these sort of hybrid systems. But what's weird about it, you only directly control one member of your party. And that's either, a lot of times it fluctuates between Lightning, who's the main character, Snow, who's one of the main characters, and a girl whose name I'm blanking on right now. And basically, you can only input commands for them. There's sort of these command chains you can give, which are like, say you have 3 action points per turn. You can choose your attacks based on that. It's weird, and I don't know how I feel about it, because I feel like the battles aren't nearly as strategic, because I can't control the rest of my party at all. I can't even like set a customizable option, at least from what I've found, to how each member of my party is going to fight. Like I know for Persona 3, at least from what I've been told, you only control one character, but you might still be able to kind of customize how they play or whatever. Or like with Kingdom Hearts, you can't control Goofy and Donald, but you can set their like play style. You can't do that here, and it makes the combat feel very weird. I'm curious to see how it's going to play out as well, especially considering there's not really a level up system implemented from what I can tell so far, but overall, very good game. I went on a little bit of a ramble there. Or a very intriguing game is what I should say. I'm going to need to put some more time into it before I decide whether I genuinely like it or not.
Definitely sounds like a fun time.
It is, and for having picked it up for like $10, or actually less than $10, why not, right? So moving right along for games I probably won't get caught up in rambling quite as badly on, we have Persona 4, because that's going to be what I'm playing for the rest of my life. Then we've also got Kingdom Hearts and Tearaway. Kingdom Hearts, pretty good game. I'm eventually going to get through that. And Tearaway for the PlayStation Nueve, which I've been sort of fluctuating between titles for that. Just need something for a break from Persona 4 from time to time. That's for you, my friend.
So Tearaway's your junk food game, huh?
Yeah, basically. Just something that, like, I'm playing all these RPGs. I need something that's just like a quick fix real quick.
Yep. So speaking of RPGs, I have been starting Oblivion, Elder Scrolls 4. A lot of Elder Scrolls elitists or purists, whatever you want to call them, do say that this is the better Skyrim, albeit less pretty. So far, I do like the main story, and I have heard that the real gems in this game are the side quests. So I'll have to see about that. I have done one of them that was pretty neat. I have to give props for it. It was very cool. One thing I don't like definitely is that the armor and your weapons wear out now, and you have to repair them 24/7. Like it's just kind of annoying. It's always on your mind because you're like, "Oh, is that enemy worth me damaging my sword to go fight?" You know?
Right, and that's one of those things that I think in more modern RPGs we've gotten used to these sort of housekeeping type of things just to make our lives easier as players, which older RPGs don't necessarily always implement. Now, whether they're good or bad features is always sort of up to debate and within the community. Some people like the realism that it presents for things to wear out more easily. Other people just think it's annoying. So it kind of varies. Kind of got to choose which fan base you want to satisfy there.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the more older school style RPGs, which I am a fan of. I do sort of enjoy how brutal they can be at times, because I've died in Morrowind a lot, so...
Your game has now been defeated. Ended.
Yeah. You have killed the crucial NPC. You need to start a new save. It's like, wow.
Lovely.
Okay.
I was only 40 hours into this.
So, moving right along, the other game I've been playing is Persona 5. And, oof, it is just as enthralling as when I first started it. It seems that there's never a dull moment. There's always something that you could be doing or that you should be doing, And the soundtrack, the visuals, the award-winning menus, just, top-tier game. I can't wait till you get to this, Andrew. You're going to love it.
Gotta beat Persona 4 first, which I'm only 45 hours into.
Oh, one day.
Yeah.
Moving along, I'm still entrenched in Twilight Princess. This is the remaster for Wii U. It's definitely Twilight Princess. The game
Still got them polygons.
Yep, the gamepad sure doesn't add much.
Yep, that sounds like a typical Wii U port.
Just as intended. And last but not leastly, my personal junk food game is still, and will probably always be, Just Cause 2. It is a wonderful, wonderful open world game. They really nailed it with this one, I feel like, because it's one of those games where you do actually feel like the main character at some points. And combining that whole aspect with weapon upgrades and vehicles to try out and test and bases to take over, cliffs to jump off of, there's just nothing you can't really do in that game.
No, that sounds like a really good time. I'm looking forward to trying that out. That was one of the games that I recently picked up. Heard a lot of good things about it. Also, Just Cause 4 is out on the PlayStation 4, so if I like that, I'll probably have to give that a pickup.
I'm still considering it in my mind.
For
definitely.
X-Bone.
Yep.
Yeah. I know 3's in there as well. Do you know if that's one of those game series where you have to kind of play through them in order?
I don't believe so.
Okay,
I
so it's sort
definitely
of like
don't think
Final
it is.
Fantasy. You can just pick up and go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Same main character and all that, but it's always a different location, always a different plot.
Gotcha.
They usually, from what I understand, they usually pretty much forget about the previous game.
Nothing wrong with that. It makes it a lot more accessible to people versus like imagine if Final Fantasy made it so all the plots interconnected. Like you'd be totally screwed. Nobody would be picking it up because that's 14 freaking games. Well, more than that actually,
Yeah,
because you have
way
X,
more.
X2, 13
DS games.
13-2, all the DS spin-offs, 13 Lightning Returns. It just goes on. And then the MMO ones, like, it's just crazy.
It definitely seems very intimidating.
Yeah, that's why I'm glad they kind of stand on their own. But with all that being said, guys, this is actually one of our shorter podcasts, just kind of catching up on some things. So hopefully you enjoyed. If so, be sure to decimate that like button. Let us know what your thoughts were in the comment section down below and subscribe. And we'll catch you guys next time with some more podcasting and gamer speak.
Help us get some more blast processing.
Yeah. See y'all later.